Welcome to the Configure Price Quote Podcast. My name is Sohn and I'm the founder of CPQ Consulting. This podcast is 100% focused on Configure Price Quote, also known as CPQ, and will provide you useful insights into this topic. Today I'm excited to welcome Adam Wainright, Director of Product Management at HubSpot. Adam joined HubSpot through the acquisition of Cacheflow, where he helped simplify CPQ workflows and accelerate sales performance. With over 15 years experience in revenue operations and GTM roles, Adam now focuses on building a unified revenue operating system, connecting configuration, quoting, and forecasting into one streamlined experience. Adam lives in Marina, California. Welcome to the CPQ Podcast, Adam.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, Frank. Good to see you.
I'm very excited to have you on, and let's start by telling me a little bit more about yourself and what you did before you joined Cacheflow and then afterwards HubSpot.
Yeah, what a journey. It's a great question. I would say what would likely be most relevant to our audience is when I got into software SaaS, as you mentioned, the 15 years, I started in CPQ. But it is worth mentioning that even before when I got into software, I spent some time in banking. But my initial interest actually was I was going to go be a teacher. And so I spent some time abroad doing some teaching. And what's compelling about all of that, of course, is that I used a lot of the things that I've learned in terms of teaching to actually influence how, in this case, I would go to market and potentially help my customers make purchase decisions. Banking really helped me understand more about finance and ultimately how businesses generate and manage revenue. So that's all to say about something like 12, 13, almost 15 years ago, I got into CPQ, but I also got into contract lifecycle management under a little company called Selectica at the time, now Determine, where it was just drinking from the fire hose in terms of understanding all of these acronyms, CPQ and QTC, and I mean, you understand. But over the years had undertaken new roles and went and sold new things that ultimately always kept me in the revenue operations space. And so I did spend some time at a little company called Clari, where we were forecasting AI. We were doing AI before it was cool. But again, right there, pinned back to the revenue operations space. Before that, I was at a company called CallidusCloud, where we'd made a number of acquisitions that were really all affiliated with revenue operations, including a CPQ product. And so, yes, I have always been in this space. But the good news is when I joined a company when I was back at when I joined Cacheflow, what I had seen was my co-founders at the time they were really onto something. They were doing something different with CPQ. And being a member of the go-to-market team and building multiple sales teams over the course of my career, this topic is near and dear to my heart because I've seen so many sellers frankly panic because the number one hurdle that ends up being the tactical, practical hurdle that gets in their way, let alone the objection handling skills that you need to develop in a negotiation. But when it comes to actually the customer saying yes after a hard fought sales cycle, the one thing that ends up just crushing the spirit of the seller is having to figure out how the heck they're going to take all of this lovely evaluation context and put it into a quote and get the customer to sign a deal. Because those systems traditionally have been just difficult to use or manage. And so when I went to join Cacheflow, I took all of that energy and that point of view on how we can ultimately drive a better process. And we were successful at persuading the market that we were onto something. And of course, HubSpot came back and said, hey, could you do that for us?
Very cool. So, and it's an interesting background also, right? So with the teaching, what you mentioned. So now I wonder with this long background now in CPQ, how has that helped you to shape how you make decisions in the CPQ environment?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question. I think the key is because CPQ is such a known. I think the teaching component to my job has enabled me to be a little bit more of an active listener. So in I found that over the course of my career, I've worked with a lot of go-to-market professionals, and we love to tell people why our product is good and how to buy it. But the real winners in any sales environment are the ones who help the customer feel really good about the decision they're making. And then the signing process is kind of just like the inevitable final step. So teaching has given me a lot of ability to really take that concept of understanding and apply it in a way that I think a lot of customers really appreciate it. It's just ultimately helped me go and be successful with my customers. And I should qualify. I've spent my career in a go-to-market, customer-facing sales capacity. I've built and scaled sales teams. I've been a part of multiple acquisitions. I've seen businesses go from 7 million to 200 million, et cetera. And I've been a material part of helping companies do that. I now come into the HubSpot environment on the product side, taking all of this experience and frankly, emotion associated with this topic so that we can go build an innovative way to CPQ for our HubSpot customers.
No, love it. I think especially your part about the active listening is something that's widely underestimated, right? So because most people like to talk and tell you about all this stuff. So I think a very important point. Anyway, so just to mention that. Now, I wanted to ask you something that you had mentioned in preparation for this meeting, which I thought was very interesting, was the Supersonic Sales Process, right?
Yes.
Sounds very flashy and funny. Tell me more about that. What do you mean by that? What does it do?
I love that you asked that question. Indeed, when I was at Clari, I was asked, I actually took a hiatus. I was an individual contributor. I'll even tee it up this way. When I was at CallidusCloud, I was spent about 5 years there, and I had successfully gone from being an individual contributor up to being a GM of the Litmos LMS product, which was one of the sub products of about 13 or 15 or so that we sold. And what I had identified was in order for my sales team to ramp quickly and hit quota quickly and consistently, we needed to create standardized go-to-market sales processes. Any sales leader will tell you, duh. Okay, that makes sense. The problem is that you're typically challenged between systems and process and just getting your sellers to do the things that you've identified as being the optimal path to help a customer through a sales cycle. That said, when we were acquired by SAP, I went to Clari because I was going to determine how if I sort of got lucky and rose up through the ranks, or if I could apply what I'd learned and actually go be a successful individual contributor at Clari. I was and quickly moved up the ranks again. I paused. I went and did a little startup and helped them go raise their Series A after landing some big logos like LinkedIn and, in fact, HubSpot, coincidentally. But then Clari called me back and said, hey, we want you to come back and run a new team. So when I came in to run the new team, I now at that point had kind of codified the best way to accelerate a deal cycle. And the simple concept is don't pitch product, pitch process. And what I really mean is most customers want to buy a thing. And then they talk to a seller and the seller says, we can do all of these things. Oh, sure, we got you. We can fix that. We can help over here. The problem is that they fail, especially in that first touch, to describe or make real how much time this is going to take, who I need to go get internal sign off. What does it mean for me when I start making moves on the chess piece? Like I have to organize the sequence of events necessary to facilitate the sales process. The seller should be recommending this. And so the Supersonic Sales Process was simply put, was a way to basically say, hey, customer, if you're interested in doing these things or solving these problems, these are the 3 or 5 or 6 things that you're likely going to need to go do in order for us to arrive at driving that value that you so need. And when you put it on a slide and you really talk through that and you spend time and take the care necessary to make real in the buyer's mind exactly what they're probably going to be asked to do during an evaluation, that's how you can build momentum today to move the needle. Most sellers think I'm selling a product when in fact they're selling the very first step. Can I get the customer to say yes to move into the next step? And so what you don't want to do is just sell the next step. And what you don't want to do is just sell the value outcome. You want to get them to see the entire process. And so the Supersonic Sales Process simply was a way for us to put that entire process into a very easy story narrative. And we were very successful at deploying it, and it enabled us to take like 6-month cycles and bring them down to about 45 days. And I did that, and we were very successful. And I went from like 3 sellers to about 14 during my tenure as a leader there at Clari.
Wow, very cool. So now I also see where the name comes from, right? So the supersonic. So
That's
the
right. That's
was the
right.
kind of
They called me,
speed.
they always called me Supersonic. Go Supersonic. So
Excellent. So then one personal question. So you mentioned the recent acquisition of HubSpot, Cacheflow by HubSpot, right? So what was your personal biggest lesson learned up to this point from that acquisition?
yeah, that's actually an excellent question. I think the biggest lesson learned was one that I think felt well, like I had some grasp of, but it was really material when I went into Cacheflow, and that is customers are looking for suggestions on ways to do things, not necessarily like the customers will come in looking to solve a problem, but with the appropriate discovery, active listening, and potentially repositioning of their pain statement. Often what will happen is that they'll say, I actually am open to doing new things. For example, at Cacheflow, we were a CPQ product, but we did bigger things, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the CPQ component wasn't necessarily as deep in certain areas of traditional CPQ. And so I would tell customers, they'd come in and I'd say, look, customers come in asking me about CPQ, but they'll often buy from me because what they're actually trying to do is more of like an un-CPQ. They're trying to simplify process. And so what we would end up having is a better conversation around where the customer's hardcore constraints and requirements are. And then we could effectively look at everything else as perhaps a relic of systems that they've been using traditionally only because they had to, because that was what was available at the time. And so the net headline, I think, is the lesson for me was be sure to ask the customer why they do the things they do. And then gauge whether or not they're willing to go do something different or new. And if they're typically willing to do something different or augment their process, you're going to have a far better evaluation than when you just try to back into strict requirements. Now, CPQ, as we all know, is a land of strict requirements. And so those conversations, of course, can go in different ways. But if you know your evaluation process, the person evaluating the technology is open to being influenced or persuaded to look at new ways to do things, you're often going to probably come out with a better outcome. And so we're looking at doing that, of course, as product builders in HubSpot because we have a much larger customer ecosystem. And so in this context, we've got to take that concept and we've got to 10x it so that we can identify the lowest hanging fruit opportunities for the largest set of customers to win.
Excellent. So before we talk about Cacheflow and what has changed since the acquisition, I have to ask you one question, and that is, what do you like to do when you don't work? I hope you still have enough time when to do something.
I'm of the mind that in order to be most fulfilled, it's personal health, family, and then work. And so indeed, my wife and I love to go running in the morning, every morning. And on the weekends, we like to take the kids hiking. I live here in beautiful Marina, as you know, so I go down to Big Sur. For those of us that are familiar with the California Bay Area, Point Lobos. So yes, we are active runners and hikers, and we like to be outdoor. I love to be in the redwoods. If I can be in the redwood forest, I'm happy.
Very cool. Yeah, you live in a very nice part of the country. There's no question about that. Excellent. So then let's switch gears and let's talk a little bit about Cacheflow, right? So what are the biggest changes since the company was acquired by HubSpot?
Yeah, I mean, the first one certainly is we went from being a small but mighty crew at Cacheflow to now having a small army of engineers and product managers. So we're certainly benefited by having just an absolutely world-class team of builders. But of course, it comes with its own unique challenges. Now we have to get everybody aligned on the vision and the mission. And, in our land, we, for what it's worth, we're coming into the commerce hubs, for example, right, at HubSpot, which traditionally has been a payments processing value offering to HubSpot customers, but the narrative hasn't quite fit very cleanly into the marketing hub and the sales hub value position. And so a lot of sellers don't really position it. It's meant to be PLG. Not a lot of customers know it exists. So our entrant into the Commerce Hub to build a CPQ to better connect the sales process to the revenue lifecycle management process, that whole concept is just, frankly, it's a slightly new concept. And so not only do we have an awesome army of experts and world-class builders, but we do have to now get everybody to understand the CPQ world, the legacy that is CPQ, the traditional systems that have come before. We have to take into context the opportunity to innovate, especially in a world of AI. So this all takes time because this is a sort of a never-ending education exercise. But the good news is that we, again, have this extraordinary team, and frankly, they're extraordinarily hungry to think about new ways to approach what I like to call is the sort of revenue operating system.
Quick break from today's episode. If you're looking into CPQ solutions, I've got 3 resources you don't want to miss. First, the CPQ briefing subscription. Think of it as your shortcut at the very start of the buying process. Instead of spending weeks hunting for vendor information or sitting through endless demos, you get access to briefing documents that explain what each CPQ solution does, how it's positioned, and what to watch out for. It's like speed dating CPQ vendors without the awkward small talk. Now, once you're in the middle of your CPQ journey and you need help narrowing things down, that's where Novo CPQ Consulting comes in. We work one-on-one with you, completely independent and neutral, to figure out the best fit for your business. We don't sell software. We don't take sides. We just help you make the smartest choice. And finally, when you're late in the buying process and you need to make a real decision, there's the CPQ sales report. This is a deep dive 20+ page report that compares vendors in detail and can save you 1 or 2 weeks in your selection process. No fluff, no vendor bias, just facts you can rely on. So whether you're just starting out, stuck in the middle, or ready to make a final call, Novo CPQ has you covered. Tell me a little bit more about your recent inbound event, Adam.
So that's a great question. So I would say, so inbound was excellent this year. I would say, obviously I'm biased. We're here talking about CPQ. I think 3 things sort of stick out in my mind about inbound. I'm going to start with the CPQ side. First, CPQ is something that we've launched because we made the announcement of acquisition, whatever it was now, 9, 10, 11 months ago or so. And so we are teeing up a bigger picture story, but we're doing it through the first major domino to fall, which is going to be CPQ. In that context, the winners who are going to be adopting this solution are going to be sellers, frontline leaders, revenue operations, specifically in terms of helping sellers and sales leaders close deals fast, speed. So building quotes has to be fast and easy. 2, visibility, right? How do we help sellers see engagement across the quotes they're sending out in the same tool in HubSpot, where they're getting all of this additional signal so that when the customer accelerates a close date, promises I'll sign by Friday, in trade for discounting, for example, how do we arm the sellers with that visibility so that they can run those plays and ensure that we're holding our buyers to account? So visibility is a second major win there. And then the third one, of course, is control, revenue governance. How does my revenue operations team or my executive leadership team deploy approvals guardrails necessary to grow and scale a profitable business? So that's sort of the lens from which we're framing the CPQ deployment. So we're launching CPQ with the core value statement around the seller, the frontline leader, the revenue operations leader, around speed, visibility, and control. For us, this is really the first stop in a bigger mission, which will be to enable the quote at the time that the quote is produced, all of the data that is rendered on that quote, instead of it getting locked into a PDF, it's now flexible and free to move to manage downstream processes, billing, invoices, payments collection. And so in that way, our North Star really is to get a larger revenue operating system or revenue lifecycle management solution embedded in the HubSpot ecosystem so that as customers are looking to continue to consolidate their tech stack, HubSpot has a meaningful offering that will actually help them properly unify not just the lead to the sale, but now the sale to the revenue process.
Yeah.
And so it's exciting for us because we talked about CPQ, but what we're really talking about is this next big mission, and more to come on those details. But our North Star is revenue operations in a big, big way. Manage my customer revenue lifecycle, my cross-sell, my renewals, my upsells, my order management, my fulfillment, my proration processes, my co-terming processes. So that's really what we're excited about. And then I'll say, in terms of Inbound, the event, HubSpot as a ecosystem for the customers was really talking about something that's near and dear to our marketing friends and brothers and sisters, which is it's a new world. SEO is becoming less and less relevant in terms of how you grade yourself as a successful marketer. And we're now moving to a world where AEO, AI optimization, is really the key. So we introduced a new concept called loop marketing, where you are building marketing assets that amplify your brand. And so if you've got a brand forward approach, HubSpot is going to help customers seize control of the new markets that we find ourselves in, the new way we find ourselves in terms of using and leveraging AI, so that we can continue to help drive traffic to you or your website, but not necessarily through what were considered the traditional channels. Now it's this new AI channel. And so in that context, we wanted to also be a big part of the AI story. So a lot of what we built in CPQ was AI focused, AI first.
Very interesting, and that's a very big topic, has been for a while, and I expect even for the next 6 to 12 months, there will be lots of announcements from lots of different vendors in that regard. You mentioned almost everything I could think of, and maybe I overheard it, so apologies if I have a duplicate question, but I didn't hear anything about usage-based pricing and how that potentially impacts your development and further rollout. So
yeah, excellent question. So you're absolutely right. The market is quickly in the CPQ revenue management space. There is a massive move from the traditional static model, which was the one time, and then of course the subscription model that that you and I are quite familiar with and have grown up in, now towards the usage-based model. And so indeed, we have a large, it's one of our strategic 7 to go and tackle the usage-based product enhancements. So across all of the different product types that persist in the CPQ product, we're introducing a usage-based product. We did this at Cacheflow. So when a customer sends a couple of line items, 2 or 3 maybe usage-based, we'll have a placeholder there. You can pipe in via an API, something that maybe hits that field and just aggregates over time. And maybe we spin up net new invoices if it's a billing in arrears motion, or if it's perhaps a true-up motion. The net headline is usage is something that is very much on our mind, and we have the team that is building the billing and invoicing capabilities are looking at this as one of the enhancements that we can expect to roll out here sometime in the next few quarters.
Very interesting. So now what I'm wondering also is, so HubSpot has been obviously very popular. I heard that from various system integrators, vendors, right? So also companies eager to work with. The ones I could think of right now is potentially Mobileforce and DealHub, and there are probably more. So don't want to leave out anyone on purpose, but that's the two that I can think of. I was just wondering, so now that HubSpot has Cacheflow, what does it mean for other potential partners? These two are just an example for potentially other CPQ companies that also work with or partner with HubSpot.
Excellent question. And indeed, we are this is actually a really cool topic, because coming into HubSpot, we have an ecosystem. We've got these lovely partners. You're right. DealHub, absolutely world-class team, and they've got a lot of history and experience, and they're crushing it across all of the verticals and segments. Mobileforce, really complex configurator requirements. If you're not just building a quote, but perhaps assembling a product, Mobileforce is an excellent solution. And there are others. There's a company called Quote Happily. Quote Happily is good. They're more sort of like built on the HubSpot rails. They're an excellent solution if you require some serious complexity, but not necessarily warrant the need of a deal hub or a mobile force. There's another company called Glean Quotes. And of course, finally, PandaDoc is an interesting example because they, of course, got into the CPQ game. So absolutely, the partner ecosystem is a rich one, and what that actually has done is that actually has afforded us as builders to think about what we want to prioritize today, and in the event that there's perhaps an answer that we could actually introduce our customers to, right? That actually enables us to maybe prioritize aspects of the sort of foundational build and say, well, maybe we don't necessarily need to go do something on the heavier duty side of conditional logic or conditional rule because we potentially can introduce a partner. And then that'll buy us the runway necessary to really get the underpinnings of the solution dialed in and bulletproof so that our other partner grouping, our solutions partners, can build out a tower of value on top of our foundation. And then, of course, alternatively, if that's not the right solution for you, customer, you of course do have this deep ecosystem of world-class vendors that we do partner with. So the short answer is we have a great relationship with all of our vendor partners, and they are absolutely a part of our process. And even to the extent where we've got discovery questions that enable us to identify when to pursue a HubSpot CPQ purchase versus, hey, you're actually a better fit for partner X, Y, and Z. That's baked into our actually go-to-market process.
I want to follow up on one thing you mentioned a little bit earlier, artificial intelligence, as mentioned before. So lots of discussion. What I'm interested in, can you give me a couple of examples that really make a difference right now to your customers? And maybe in two buckets. One is on the customer side, where they really get a better experience because they could use AI, right? Or do use AI. And then also on the admin side, where we would say, hey, this makes the administration of the tool much easier because we have that.
Awesome question. Yeah, this is front and center for all of our builders right now. Starting with the user, AI. When we were at Cacheflow, we had this idea, and we were successfully building towards it before we got acquired, where the seller and the buyer are on a conversation just like you and I are talking now. And after some conversation, the buyer says, I get it, Adam, I love it. Just send me a quote, send me a quote. And then of course the seller has to stop and say, well, let's make sure we get some of those details. And so let's talk about, I can't give you a number, but let me tell you how you buy. And then that potentially opens a conversation around products and users or usage and limits and right aspects of the CPQ potential build. And in any case, that now is a part of a transcript. And so in a perfect world, that transcript is not only going to inform how the conversation went for the CRM, that's sort of the first entry point to using transcripts, unstructured data for CRMs. But the second obvious step now is identify everywhere where we could contribute to the building of a quote. And do that in a format now so that the behavior changes. They actually have better conversations around just exactly what the customer should or will potentially buy so that the machine AI can deliver the seller a pro forma, a first pass quote. And so that's a sort of CPQ North Star. But today, what we've delivered, which is really, really a brilliant sort of first introduction, a first foray into AI for CPQ, is a way for a seller to pull up the quote and simply have a conversation through our Breeze chat experience right inside of the quote builder, so that all they have to do is just say, I need this, these are the amount of units, or these are the different components of the cycle, or these are the different discounts I'm looking for. And they can have more of a casual conversation with the quote, which will then automatically do a number of things. It'll just change the quote, et cetera, based on what the seller is asking for. We think that sellers are trying to have a far more engaging, natural, call it casual, conversational experience when they're building quotes, as opposed to maybe the traditional, more rigid systems. And so we've launched that. And then we've also launched something called a closing agent. And so the closing agent is a buyer experience so that when the buyer gets the quote, they can actually ask questions because maybe the buyer was not a part of the evaluation process. Maybe they're just the signer. they might be asking questions that were probably covered in the cycle earlier, but it's just sort of like scratch that itch. And if the agent wasn't there, what they would probably do is say, hey, champion, evaluation person, go set up some time with the rep so I can talk about the quote, right? So we're going to spare cycles. We're going to save cycles by giving that actual buyer the opportunity to ask those questions in a closing agent living on the quote. And then in the event where they're saying, okay, I also want you to waive that implementation fee, for example, the agent's going to say, that's not something I can do, but I'd be happy to rope in your rep right now and get them live on the horn. So we want to keep the buyer and the seller tightly engaged, and we're doing so by actually building AI right into the quote so that when the buyer is buying, we can help influence the outcome.
Very interesting. So how many of these agents do you have available right now?
Well, in the CPQ land, it's the closing agent, but we've got a lot of plans to do a lot of other things. Across HubSpot, we introduced a ton of agents. One of our most prolific agent is the customer agent, the customer success agent, which has been a massive, has landed very, very well with our customers. And it's helping customers deploy success agents to kind of run interference for maybe to resolve the easier tickets. And so this is a space that HubSpot's going to continue to make pretty significant investments in. In fact, I would say this is probably the key announcements that we had been making, is to take the concept of deploying agents, because we have all of this CRM data, sort of a paramount part of the HubSpot experience going forward.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I think this is super interesting. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end. Hence, my very last question is, what's a good way for interested listeners to contact you or your team in case they have any follow-up questions?
I love it. Yes, absolutely. So can I just give my email out right now? I just sort of say it out loud. Right? It's awainwright@hubspot.com. Please do not hesitate to reach out. I have been selling myself internally as the hand to shake when it comes to learning and enablement and training and learning how CPQ all works and how to have a revenue conversation. I extend that to our customers as well. Anybody who's interested in learning more about this, please do not hesitate to reach out. Certainly, there are areas of the HubSpot.com website where you can contact sales. But if you want to have a direct connection to the Commerce Hub and learn specifically about CPQ, please use my email, awainwright@hubspot.com.
Adam, thank you very much for making time for the CPQ podcast today.
Frank, it's a pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on.
I'd like to thank everyone for listening and hope you learned something interesting today. If you like the podcast, please go ahead and rate it on iTunes or share it with your friends and colleagues. In the meantime, you can find us online at www.novocpq.com. So long, everyone.